Good evening. My name is Karen Thompson, and I am a senior staff attorney at the ACLU of New Jersey. I'm thrilled to be here tonight to moderate part 3 of the Say Her Name series hosted by NCAP on women, race, and police violence. Newark Communities for Accountable Policing is an umbrella organization based in Newark and aimed at building a respectful, accountable, and a transparent Newark Police Department. NCAP works for reforms that promote community safety and lead to community policing practices that uphold and respect the human and constitutional rights of all Newarkers. And we're pleased to be here tonight as part of the steering committee for NCAP alongside the People's Organization for Progress, the Ironbound Community Corporation, and the Newark chapter of the NAACP. So thank you very much, NCAP, and thanks all of you for joining us tonight. So before we introduce your panelists and start our discussion, I just want to say a few words to kind of catch us up to where we are now since the last time that we met on September 15th. In those 2 months to the day, or 3 months, sorry, to the day, 48 people across this country have been involved in police-involved shootings. And during the course of this year, 8 people in New Jersey alone have been shot by the police, 5 of whom are Black. Now, in our 2 former panels, we did talk about very specific cases. We talked about Breonna Taylor, we talked about Sandra Bland, and we talked about the carceral system and the lack of attention that's paid to women's struggles within it and with regard to police brutality. But tonight, we are going to focus very specifically in the experience of police violence on the individual and collective psyche. And we're going to look at that from both personal and professional experiences. So since 2001, the rate of suicide among Black male teenagers has increased by 60%. And for Black female teenagers, it has increased by 182%. And that's according to a report in the Journal of Community Health. Beginning in 2018, we've seen this spike in suicide to the point where it's become the second leading cause of death in Black children aged 10 to 14, and the third leading cause of death in Black adolescents aged 15 to 19. So when you look at all the data, when we combine it from 2001 to 2015, the National Institute of Mental Health has found that suicide rates among children ages 12 and younger are higher among Black children than their white peers. They're more likely to die of suicide. So why? Now we know that Black people face increased risk factors for both depression and for suicide, right? And that means that they're looking at their experiences of racism and how that influences their mental health issues. There are higher rates of unemployment and financial and food insecurity. There are disparities in general health issues, and there's limited access to care, all of which increase the burden of mental illness in Black communities. Now, this is nothing new. This has gone on literally for centuries, but despite this heavy burden, Black people and individuals in several racial and other ethnic groups have historically had low rates of suicide, but this has been changing recently, and especially for Black youth. So why? Again, we're talking about experienced trauma, lived trauma. We're talking about untreated trauma, and we're talking about unnamed trauma. And so when we talk about the overt violence that people experience at the hands of law enforcement, we don't often talk about the covert effects of that violence, which happens to be very much as destructive. So our work tonight is to look at that, to look at what that means for our communities and for our youth. And so it is my honor to be able to talk about this with our esteemed panelists. And I'd like to just introduce them all by name. Joining us tonight is Taj Williams, who is a writer and entrepreneur and also a survivor. Stephanie James Harris, Executive Director of the Amistad Commission. Crystal Charlie Sibley, the second Vice President of the NAACP New Jersey State Conference. Dr. Monique Swift, who's the President of the Association of Black Psychologists. So with that, I think everyone is here. Let's wait for everyone to tune in briefly. See everyone's shining faces. There you go. Excellent. Ms. Sibley, are you here with us? I hope she can hear us. All right, well, let me just get started. And first of all, this is actually a question for all of you. And so I think if we just take it maybe in the order that I read your names and your titles, and if you could just tell everybody a little bit about yourselves and your work, and maybe answer this very first question, which is, what is your personal or professional experience with that you've had with police violence? And Taj, if you want to start. And I think you're on mute, unfortunately, so you have to start again.
Okay, how about now? All right, good. So good evening, everyone. My name is Taj Williams. So I would say my own personal experience with police brutality has been with my oldest brother. Losing him to police brutality a little over 21 years ago. That has it effectuated change in my life like I never really could imagine. And I say that just because I have taken these last few years or last couple of decades to grow up, and to grow up with having that as a very challenging memory is something that I never take for granted. And it always reminds me of how strong I am and just how persevering I am because although it was a very sad situation, because I think most of the police brutality cases are, probably ending in some type of guns or some type of violence when it comes to, you know, uh, I want to say objects, right? Like a gun or something else, like a stick or something. I remember being a teenager in my late teenage years, like 17, 18 years old, listening in on the case for my brother. And I just would hear the stories of how they beat my brother to death with their bare hands, like punching him, kicking him, spraying pepper spray down his throat. And he was asthmatic. So things like that was really traumatizing. So I like I said, I spent the latter years of my life just really being able to kind of unpack a lot of things that I feel like I buried back then. And it has really forced me to take a look at myself in a different type of way. And that's why I say I definitely feel a strength that I didn't even know that I had. Um, and even, in terms of like making sure that he's remembered, right? Like his legacy is remembered and the person that he was, not the person that they beat up and killed. So I think that that's pretty much it. I've had other experiences with family members, nothing with myself personally, but mostly with the men in my family. Um, but it's a very sensitive topic, no matter who, you know. And so that's it.
Thank you. Let's go to you, Ms. Harris.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Stephanie James Harris. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Homicide Commission at the New Jersey Department of Education. And I will say that it's hard to even say this as a sentence or realize this came ready to come out of my mouth. But the reality is, as I'm saying, as an African-American woman, I feel like I've been blessed that I have not had any direct personal experience with any kind of police violence, but I will share this. I am a mother of two, well, I guess young men. I can't even say teenage sons anymore. I'm the mother of sons, African American males. age 18 and 20. And as a New Jersey suburban mom, one of the rites of passage is in their driving and getting their driver's license. And what for me, I remembered favorably as something that was met with such excitement. I found that as my children were entering the time when they were beginning to drive in suburbs of South Jersey, where we reside, it was met with such fear and trepidation, and not so much about the operation of the car, but what that would mean, and preparing them and understanding that something that I understood would become a part of their everyday existence for job, for transportation, for life, also meant that every time they walked out of my door, I didn't know whether or not they were going to make it home. And that one misstep could really have a phone call to me that I was not prepared to have over handing them a set of keys. When my eldest son had been traveling probably about 4 or 5 months, maybe not even that long, I had allowed him to borrow my car to go to his high school homecoming dance. And on his way home, he had gotten stopped by the police because they said that he was not able to navigate some cones in his newness of driving on a highway that did not have a barrier, and was kind of concerned about his proximity in the lanes. And the police pulled him over because they weren't sure if he was drunk, quote unquote. And when he looked back, he had called me in hysterics. This 6'2", very full of life 18-year-old young man with all of his bravado called me in hysterics like he was 4, crying hysterically because he had 4 cop cars behind him and he did not want to pull over without me being on the line. And of course, they did not know I was on the phone, and they attempted to kind of read him the riot act and asked him all kinds of questions about where he was going, whose car. They soon discovered that I was on a speakerphone. Once they discovered I was on the phone, they of course kind of shut it down and just handed him a ticket. But once they left, it took me 30 minutes to convince my child to drive the rest of the way home. He cried horrifically because he said he wasn't sure if he was going to die. And it struck me that just what a burden that must be to carry every day. My kids don't get in the car without my phone walking around with me. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, the rule usually is don't answer a phone when you're behind a wheel. Well, I made sure that my children's cars had all kinds of mechanisms to be able to remotely answer. Because if I call and you don't answer, my heart drops. You got to answer when you're driving. When you're behind a wheel, you got to answer me. I need to know you're safe. And we live with that daily. I know that that's a commonality for most African American parents. I know I'm looking at all the heads that are shaking. I know we all understand that. But the reality of that, sometimes when you step back and think about it, just blows me away. So I do use the word blessed. And I hope to keep it that way. And that's something that I probably should even have to say. But it is my reality.
Thank you. And we will talk more about this, but thank you for that. Ms. Sibley and Dr. Harris, I'm sorry, this is about the week too. So Dr. Harris, Ms. Sibley, you're up.
So good greetings on behalf of the New Jersey State Conference, NAACP, and also bring greetings on behalf of Southern Burlington County, NAACP. So, hearing my 2 sisters ahead of me, it's kind of heavy. It's like, I don't like, oh gosh, it's time for me to answer. I pull myself together. And hearing about Dr. Harris's young sons made me think about my days in college. I went to a historically Black university, very proud graduate of Delaware State University. And I can remember one year at homecoming, coming out of the homecoming party, and they had a line of, I don't know if they were Delaware State Troopers or Dover PD, but they were about it. You would think it's the whole force was out there, and a lot of them were standing out there with their dogs on our sacred ground of our HBCU, ready for what? For kids enjoying a college homecoming. And in my years at Delaware State University, I was a nice student. I was a good student, right? I won't embellish. But in my time there, I also took the time to go to other schools and see what their campus life was like, and had attended other social functions, particularly at University of Delaware, the white university right up the road. And I can never think of a time where I came out and came out of a UD social setting and felt like an animal or some sort of savage being preyed upon as that night when I came out and realized because really in HBCU is like a protected space. It's a space that is so sacred. It's a place where you're not a minority, you're not the standout. And I remember feeling so like attacked, because it was like, how dare you come into our sacred ground with your dogs, and who allowed you to come on here? And that kind of like set the tone, for me. Anytime I was in a social setting and I observed police from that day forward, and even today, it's always such a distinct difference in how young Black people are treated. I mean, that's a place of academics, and you had a line of officers with dogs ready to come after us, right? And shortly thereafter, just seeing the line of dogs, there was an altercation happened. There were no weapons or anything like that. And I watched an officer pepper spray a friend of mine at point blank range, right in the face. And that it wasn't a fatality, but it was just how inhumane that you did that. And he wasn't a part of the fight. He was just out there. It was just a matter of go back to your room, boy, right? And so, that's, and there are other personal accounts. I've had my own run-ins with law enforcement as a motorist going back 10 years ago that were very unpleasant. And I went through the process of filing a formal complaint and went through IA and all this. And at the end of my entire experience, I was told that the officer's conduct was fine. And I said, you have a really low standard of conduct. Fast forward into my role as NAACP, as you can imagine, we receive so many stories, so many videos, because everyone can take their own videos now, of horrific treatment at the hands of law enforcement. And, police murder is like the deep end of it. But it's those regular interactions that are just as damaging psychologically, right? And it makes it really hard for you to be out on the street, and everything from intimidation to obviously a police assault, unwarranted assault. I have seen so many videos, so many graphic videos. I mean, when they come to us, we're not getting the edited versions that are acceptable to be shown on the Action News, right? It's raw. And I've been president for 6 years of my local, and on the state conference level for many years as well. And the things you see are really absolutely traumatizing. And so I can't even imagine being a family member of someone with the same firsthand account as Taj, right? Because, my heart literally bleeds every time I see that, but I'm not even the actual family. We're all family, but I'm not that person's blood relative. And it's so frustrating and disheartening because, as a, NAACP, we're volunteers, in your local branches, your state conferences, they're all volunteers who hold these roles. And so you're volunteering your time because you want to make a difference, but what you're up against, the protection that is in place for this savage behavior is just, it's extremely deflating, and it makes it seem like, how do we get on the other side of this? So yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to Dr. Swift.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Monique Swift, current president of the New Jersey chapter of the Association of Black Psychologists, for committed to the liberation of the African mind, the empowerment of the African character, and the enlivenment and illumination of the African spirit. Those are our principles of what we stand on. And so I thank you for having me be a part of this panel. And I'm very moved by hearing the testimonies that came before me, and incensed to some, to an extent, about the experiences that are happening. I'm not blind to it, it's happening all over, but thank you all for sharing what was really kind of personal and impactful to you in your personal lives. For me, in terms of my experience with police or police violence, hasn't been, quite honestly, as Dr. Harris mentioned, in a direct incident of violence. I have to count myself fortunate for not having had those experiences. And in saying that, I want to be able to also emphasize that in my younger years, I was somebody who had a bit of a lead foot. And so I was pulled over all the time, even to the point one time almost lost my license because I had so many tickets. But I never experienced what a lot of our brothers and many now of our sisters are experiencing just with a simple traffic stop. And so I feel fortunate. I think there are probably a lot of factors associated with that. My being a female woman probably is a factor. Maybe I look less threatening than some of my brothers and sisters to many. There's certainly studies that show that as well, that people who look more Black tend to have worse encounters with police. And so there might be those and then other factors that go along with why I have not had that experience, but I haven't. And I can't say I'm not one who hasn't had encounters with the police because I have. However, I think my being here on this panel is not because of personal experiences, but more professional experiences. And my experience with police violence has happened more in the professional setting, where that in my partnership with Equal Justice USA, which is a criminal justice reform organization, they are committed to transforming the justice system from one that kind of is retributive, that's grounded in racial inequity, one that perpetuates cycles of violence, to one that emphasizes healing and restoration through prevention. And so it is in my partnership with Equal Justice USA that I helped to pilot a program that they're doing in the city of Newark, New Jersey. And I facilitate a training that we call From Trauma to Trust. And so in that training, we're bringing together law enforcement officers in the city of Newark, along with Newark community residents and the larger community, not just exclusive to Newark. We bring them together in one space and we educate them about trauma. And we also help to try to support NPD and the Newark Police Department in creating trauma-informed practices system-wide as well. And also we try to help to bridge the gap between law enforcement and community members through mutual understanding and empathy. And so we have seen transformation happen in the course of doing what we do, both on the individual level as well as on the systems level. In fact, since we started about 5 years ago, we have seen accounts of there being a 50% reduction in civilian police complaints since the program has started, which a lot of the brass and we account also contributes to a large part to our program. And so that's kind of the large involvement that I have is through my work, my professional work with police.
Great, thank you, Dr. Swift. So before I kind of come back to you with a few more questions, I just want to let everybody know who's watching. If you're watching through Zoom, you can put questions that you might have in the Q&A. And if you're watching on Facebook, put things in the comments and we're gonna answer those at the end of the evening and get back to them. So as we go along, please put in anything that this discussion is triggering for you. So Dr. Swift, just to add on to what you were just speaking about with regard to kind of bringing some healing between the police department and community members, what kind of interventions and interventionist strategies are used for women who experience police violence related trauma? Because, you know, we've heard that there might be kind of a difference here with gender, and I'm wondering if women aren't necessarily experiencing that trauma in the same way that men are, when they do experience the trauma, what is the way to heal?
Yeah, thank you for that. So in regard to, women who are experiencing trauma, I think the bigger factor is that they are experiencing trauma at the hands of police. Trauma is an individual thing. There are higher rates of trauma in women than men, but it is a very individual thing. But for anyone, I think it needs to be recognized that a successful intervention for healing has to recognize the full scope of the problem. And so when it comes to suffering from the violence perpetrated by police specifically, you're looking at an experience, and we heard it from the other panelists, that is extraordinarily, I think somebody used the word inhumane in many ways. It creates this feeling of, that I am being devalued, that I'm being belittled. And so it has that, that quality to it, but it's also bigger than just the interpersonal injury. It's bigger than this police officer conducted himself in a way that was harmful to a citizen. There's also this notion that it's a system. The police officer is not like a sole actor. This is a system that's creating harm. And I think therein is an important piece that has to be recognized when we are intervening and treating, is that these people are up against this kind of giant in ways. And they're up against a system that is really designed and wired to support and validate itself, to justify. So we see it in many of these cases. The police are coming out, as I think it was Miss Sibley commented, that after she was experienced what she experienced, she fought the fight. And it came out that, the police officers justified, right? This is the system that we're up against. And it feels like there's no recourse. And so it can, the experience of it can be it's a gaslighting experience. And so these are ideas that need to be understood when you're working with people who have experienced police violence. And so I think another piece of it, though, specifically when I think about women, it's not just kind of the heavy-handedness and the brutality or the murders even that is happening at the hands of police, because police they're just kind of the gatekeepers or the entry way, right? The vast amount of harm, I'd say, that's happening to women is happening through the justice system. And we know that the women are the fastest growing population in the prisons, most specifically Black women and Latina women. And so this is, they work in tandem with the police, right? And so that's where a lot of the harm is being done. And we have to understand and recognize that. We have now, and we talk about this in the training, what we call the sexual abuse to prison pipeline, where that we're seeing that often women who have some sort of experience of sexual abuse, they're traumatized. And with that trauma often is unaddressed, untreated, and it creates in them maladaptive behaviors. And so these maladaptive behaviors result in their encountering the justice system. So now they're in jail, which in itself is traumatizing. Often they're not getting the care or the treatment, the healing that they're needed while they're in jail. And then they're released back into the community with the same maladaptive behaviors that they went in with, compounded by the trauma from being imprisoned. And so we're seeing this cycle that just leads them right back to the same place again. And so of the women that are in prison, 80% of them have some sort of sexual assault background. 80%, which is 4 times the rate of women in the general population. So there's something that needs to be said for the correlation between women being in prison and the sexual assault that's happening. And then, also the larger injury, the woman herself is experiencing this injury and this devalued experience, but also 60% of these women who are imprisoned have dependent children. And so therein is the sequela of the injury that continues beyond the individual herself. So now the children who are being torn away from their parent or have perhaps an unstable experience with being cared for, these are I'm sorry, I'm being distracted here. I apologize for that. But these children are also experiencing some of the effect of this trauma, and they themselves experience trauma often as a consequence of that. Another thing that we're seeing with the system is that the collateral consequences of being in prison, the fines that correspond, create hardship on these women as they get out and they try to kind of hold their lives together, but they have this other level of burden on them. So there's so many levels of trauma that's happening when women encounter experiences with the police and then consequently the justice system. And we have to look at that whole thing. We have to understand that whole picture if we're going to be successful in intervening.
So for the non-professionals, for the friends, for the families, for the neighbors, for the community, how do we support these survivors?
Yeah, and to that I say we have to tighten the village, right? We have to increase our connection with one another, because when we're looking at trauma, it is relationships that heal trauma. And so we've got to bring, the village tighter again together and revitalize that African concept of Ubuntu, which is I am because we are, and we are because I am. That recognition that we are inextricably connected to one another. And in this is the recognition that we are each other's healing. And so I think that's a huge piece of it. That's informal, but that's a huge piece of what can help us to kind of build the infrastructure for helping women to begin to heal. Also, I think too, there's, I'm sure many of you have heard it said that when you teach a man, you teach an individual. When you teach a woman, you teach a nation. And with that, if that is true, one also has to realize that when you harm a woman, you harm a nation. And so the woman is very much the fulcrum of the family. And so this harm, we have to, as a village, as a community of people, we have to be more vigilant and we have to be more intolerant when it comes to violence against women. And so again, that's kind of one piece of it. Also, I think it's important to realize, and I kind of heard this in Ms. Sibley's, when she was talking as well, that sometimes for women, the help-seeking process itself is traumatizing. And that's something I think the greater village has to be aware of in supporting that process. That the help-seeking, when I have to, if I'm abused by the police and I have to go to the police in order to try to seek justice, what does that do to me, right? And so often when the abuse happens, there's shame, there's fear, right? There's ambivalence. Nobody's going to believe me. They're not going to value what I'm saying, right? And so all of this causes many times for women to suffer in silence. But the village needs to get together behind her, right? And support her, not just behind her, you go girl, right? But going with her and helping her through what can be a very, very painful process. And so
let me actually, if you don't mind, I actually just want to take exactly where you just left off to Ms. Sibley, because I feel like if we're talking about the question of the village, and if we're talking about how there are extra layers of the damage, of the harm, and of the repair, Ms. Sibley, I'm curious what the NAACP is doing, first of all, to kind of address that question of the village. Are there things or particular initiatives that you're advancing to support Black women who are facing police violence? And also just tell us a little bit about the work that you are doing now generally.
Thank you for that. So specifically when it comes to the work with the Black women, we have a particular focus on the prisons right now. We do have we have prison branches of the NAACP, number one. And then we also have a prison committee chair. And I know that one of the things that the prison committee chair works in unison with our criminal justice chair to kind of tackle the things that we've heard about that are going on. I mean, we get letters written to us. We get, all sorts of people get messages to us in all sorts of ways about what's going on inside. And, particularly the women's facility up in North Jersey has had a very long and ugly history that I know that the committee chairs in those two areas are working diligently to make sure that there's representation in there, and that there's follow-up, right? There's follow-up to these complaints. But I will say, while I'm not an expert on the best remedy to that, I know that for them, it's going to be a long road, because the more you dig, the more you find out how far back these atrocities have been going on, particularly even in that facility. I mean, it predates several, wardens after warden after it's been there for a long time. And so, it's going to take a village to address it. And I can definitely say that, keeping in mind that everyone's volunteers, they're all doing the best that they can. In the NAACP, we have people who have volunteered for these positions based on their professional experiences and or their personal experiences. And, when it comes to criminal justice as a whole, we have a really able and competent criminal justice chair in Mr. Rick Robinson. And he definitely calls people to the carpet and seeks to hold those who make decisions accountable. He makes sure that you're not putting out information saying that you worked to change something and we weren't even at the table. We make sure that those who are in control recognize that, you need people with lived experiences at the table. If you had all the answers, maybe we wouldn't be in the problematic space that we're in now. And so the other challenge, though, is that, as I stated earlier, NAACP is strictly a volunteer organization. So you really can only go but so far with your efforts without really needing the support of your village. I can definitely tell you that there are many times when you get the report about a police incident, or you get a report about inhumane conditions in your county prison and county jail and things like that, and people, our community, people within our village, literally hand it off to the organization and say, now you do something about it. And you end up being that person who's running in with the torch, and then you look behind you and no one is there. And so when we have these kind of conversations, you have experts, you have activists, but it really, really takes everybody to be a part of it. I think that that's something that is critically lost. And I think that our oppressors know that component is missing. And I think that to really change the needle, move the needle and change the trajectory, we have to stop doing things in silos. We can't use the word village but operate in silos. It's killing our movement. It's killing our movement. And when I'm operating in my world and I have a meeting with this official, they can tell me and promise me anything, knowing that they have little accountability to me, and they can go and tell your organization something else differently, right? And so I really think that that's one of the things that New Jersey State Conference has also been working on over the last few years. We've been a part of the United Black Agenda, which is comprised of some of your leading organizations in the state around social justice and civil rights, including Salvation and Social Justice, the Black Multi-Faith Alliance, Association of Black Women Lawyers, New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. And what has changed with the United Black Agenda being formed and operating, right, is that in the coalition, there are no leaders in the coalition as far as No one is the president of the United Black Agenda. There is a 10-point plan laid out with all these organizations, and let me not forget New Jersey Black Issues Convention as well. They came to the table and said, these are the things that we're going to tackle for Black New Jerseyans, right? And we all agree that these are the things we're going to tackle. And so now we don't let you come to us separately, you know, and that has made a difference in our presence in the State House when it comes to legislation. I think that that's a big factor, as opposed to working individually. It takes away the opportunity to tell us one story and tell somebody else a different story. We have agreed that these are the issues. You can go back to like the 94% movement, which is basically, hey, 94% put this current 94% of Black vote, so put this current governor in office. There's accountability there. And so I think that when it comes specifically to you know, how we're going to address Black women and police brutality, as a group, as a village, we have to lift them up as being important in that space. Black women cannot be the afterthought or the one you talk about well after you've been focused on a Black man. We're all important, right? And I honestly think, just from conversations and experiences, you know, we're the only ones who see the difference between a Black woman and a Black man. Those who are oppressing us just see us as Black and less valued.
Right. So that, to that point, I'm going to move to you, Dr. Harris, because I think that this conversation is not a new conversation. I think this conversation is definitely informed by our history. I mean, this is like, you know, I don't mean to be basic and 101 about it, but the fact is what we're talking about today. Ida B. Wells was talking about, Diane, you know, Nash was talking about, these are very old conversations. And so how can you explain what the psychological impact is, or the implications are, of young people not knowing their history? And I kind of started this talking about suicide rates and kind of what might be contributing to that sense of helplessness, that sense of futility. And so can you talk about how history is important, why it matters in this whole conversation about a village, about support, and about, again, about repair?
So, well, first I'll go back and I want to tell people what the Amistad Commission is, because I think that will help inform even my answer. So the New Jersey Amistad Commission was mandated by law in 2002. And it is the state law and the state requirement, educational requirement, that Afro-American history would be included within the K-12 curriculum throughout the state of New Jersey, most especially targeted to the content area of social studies. I'm proud to say that we have become a part of the United Black Agenda, that this is one of the ideas that understood collectively was important enough that it should be shared among a lot of the institutions and also pushed as a universal thrust for our educational systems. And, you know, I'm proud to say that I've been the executive director now for 15 years. And this is a rock we're pushing up a mountain that should seem very simplistic and something that would be evident and obvious. And most people, when you say that it should be included through the K-12 curriculum, they all nod and say, of course, I think this is very important. But the difficulty is that we do not understand how political, and one of the most political decision it is in regards of the selection of our policy and our curriculum is for our students. It is the way in which we frame their world and we socialize them to understand the systems and the world in which they will live in. And unfortunately, those are very political decisions, because we shy away from our kids learning the hard histories of the reality of what has really been our historical narratives and our systems of power, systemic racism, supremacy ideas, and what that has meant to disenfranchise people. And so when you begin to talk about socializing people to the truths about that history, it makes a lot of people very uncomfortable, most especially in a state like New Jersey, which is siloed and oftentimes, I think it's the most fifth or sixth most segregated state in the nation. And that segregation is oftentimes led by our housing policies, our environmental segregations in regard to our town, and of course, because of home rule and our school district policies in regards of how people are able to attribute, unless they are in a regional high school system or regional system, what our school systems look like. We've got 600 plus school systems in New Jersey, and a lot of them are leaning almost 100% in one or two directions in regards of races, right? So you've got a lot of very segregated and siloed school districts that are very uncomfortable with this level of teaching. But the psychological effect of not doing that means that we are perpetuating ideas that students are not even able to grasp or conceptualize of these like ideas that are really at the root cause of what they see daily. So students in the last 6 or 7 months are asking very complex questions about the whys that social science should be able to teach them if we would be honest and include these kind of narratives in our curriculum development, which is what the Homicide Commission is trying to do. In order to teach students how to be anti-racist, in order for them to be able to see it and not to take on positions of saviors or those that are, sort of standing on the side, but actually active agents in dismantling these ideas. They have got to be very comfortable with understanding them, which means we've got to teach them. And we've got to know that these are not new practices, that unfortunately, as much as we love America and we all, are citizens here, we have to be able to perpetuate and understand its foundations and the foundations that have been intricately linked in our development. That this is not a black and white or an either or, but we have been a nation of both freedoms and injustice coinciding and growing at the same time. And so unless we can allow students to be able to understand that, then they don't understand when they are confronted with police brutalities. They don't understand the hows and the whys. They don't understand, they feel it, but they can't conceptualize it, and they're blind to it. And so those that are in positions of privilege oftentimes cannot even understand what that means because they don't feel the privilege, but yet they don't understand that it's so baked into the systems that have created them and created their ability to be in that position of privilege, that they're never going to be in a space where they'll be able to actively dismantle it or fight against it. And that is the real step for doing any kind of anti-racist education or being an anti-racist. It is not just the acknowledgement. That's number one, that's acknowledged. But number two, it is what are we going to do to really shift it and to stop this discourse? And so, the history, the narratives, as you said, the reality of even the intersectionality when we speak about African American women must be something that permeates our educational structures and that really and truly empowers our youth to be in a position to speak truth to power. But we've got to give them that truth. And that, I think, is what the real crux of what the homicide legislation sometimes is having to fight, even with administrators, teachers, sometimes even parents, about what they want their kids to truly learn. But it's the only way that we're going to get ourselves out of this space. The only way.
Thank you. Taj Williams, so you've heard from Dr. Swift, you've heard from Dr. Harris, you've heard from Ms. Sibley, and this is a conversation about the kind of overarching questions of violence, right? And the impact of it. But your experience is lived. It is not needing to be taught. It is something that you went through, that your family went through. And so you gave us a little bit of an insight into what that was like for you. I'm curious if you want to share a little bit more about your brother and what happened to him, but also if you would be willing to share some strategies that you and your family maintained to get through it, to get over, I don't know if you can even ever get over it, but to move through the grief.
Sure. So I'll start by saying that my brother's death was it was very strange at first. Like before we even knew what happened, my brother had went missing. And so I remember the night that everything happened, back then in the, the late night 19 in well, the late 90s, I should say, we didn't have cell phones. We had pagers. Um, and so my brother, I remember my sister and my mom coming into my room saying that somebody had called my brother's, or was trying to like calling back numbers that probably was in my brother's pager, and no one had heard from him. So it was very, weird in that we didn't know where he was. We didn't know what happened. No one ever would have thought in a million years that what happened was the case. So my recollection of it was when the next morning I went to school. I was a senior in high school, and so I remember being called over the loudspeaker at school, and then someone had came into the classroom that I was in and was like, "Todd, your mom is in the office crying hysterically. You should hurry up and go downstairs." And so all of this is just, it started to happen so fast. And so I remember going downstairs and seeing my mom crying, seeing my best friend crying. And I just knew it was my brother because of the previous night. So, but I remember walking outside of my school, and I just had this feeling of like, I always think of this literally. I always had this feeling of like, how like as a little kid, you have a balloon and you're so excited about this balloon, and then it's flying away and there's no way you can catch it. That is the feeling that I had when I walked outside of my school to get into my parents' car. And and so my mom just said, she said, the police killed Earl. And I was just like, are you guys sure? Like I was in denial. All of these it was just so much happening at once. And so the story was that like maybe a few days prior, a police officer by the name of Joyce Carnegie was murdered like in the downtown area of Orange. And I remember like in the days following her death, the police officers, they had like barricades or checkpoints, and they were handing out these pictures and sketches of the apparent killer and stuff like that. And I remember the police officers being so sad and so just like broken about this whole thing. And then sure enough, they said that my brother had resembled the sketch and that he was taken into police custody. And this is so interesting because normally I've told this story so many times, but today and right now I'm very emotional. I'll say that. And I'm normally like fine, but I think that with everything happening in the world, and I will get back to the story momentarily, but with just listening to the people and the sisters that recently was just speaking, like everything in being a Black woman and being tired and being, you have to put on this face that we got it all together and we got it all figured out and we're making it work and we're raising the children and we're taking care of things that need to be taken care of. And me personally, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. My spirit is tired. I'm tired. I'm tired. So I'm gonna finish saying my story, but I just needed to get that out of my spirit. So, but with my brother resembling the sketch, right? So there was this whole big thing of, well, what really happened? No one told us. So for the longest period of time, we weren't being told the truth. And then, it became a time when my parents had to go and view his body. And initially they was telling us that he died from an asthma attack, but I remember seeing pictures of my brother's body in the morgue, and his body was like beaten badly, like bruised. And we just knew something was wrong. And it was like we waited anxiously, waiting for it to come on the news, waiting to get some type of justice, because we knew that it wasn't right. And it seemed like the minute that it did air on the news, it was only for a hot second. And whatever they shared on the news, they shared everything to probably, I want to say, vilify him. They talked about the fact that he was a troubled youth, right? They talked about the fact that apparently he had a gun on him and he ran, and all of these things, but nothing ever pointed to them being the ones that was responsible for doing this, right? Nothing pointed to them being the ones that has taken this man's life, and they weren't taking any type of ownership, right? And the irony even still to this day is that they represent, and they you know they relived the moment when Joyce Carnegie was murdered. But then there's nothing ever been said about my brother. You know what I mean? It's like a woman police officer was murdered and slain in the middle of broad daylight, and they're on a manhunt to find her killer, and they find these different people. And it wasn't just my brother, multiple people were hurt in the process. My brother was the only person who died, but these people never get any type of recognition. Like, even at the end of my brother's case, the case was settled. I want to say it was settled because I don't think that it was finished. At the time, four initially 5 police officers were found guilty of violating his civil rights. 21 police officers were indicted when the whole thing happened, because they literally had to shut the precinct down. But 21 police officers were indicted. 5 of them were found guilty. One of them ended up being let off from, like, I don't remember at the time, but he was like, I don't know. But they let him go. And then so the 4 remaining police officers served time in which none of them got anything more than like 2 to 4 years. And this was all for violating his civil rights. So no one ever answered for his death, his murder, and it just literally, that was it. So for the last 21 years, I have been very inquisitive, and I've even written letters, right, to the mayor, the current mayor, and the city council. And I've been asking questions like, okay, it's been 21 years. We still haven't received an apology. Even my family has never received an apology. So just to move forward, in terms of how do we heal, right? And I can only speak for myself. I from me growing up, being a young girl at the time, to being a woman now and a mother now. Um, I realized that my healing is my responsibility. And like I said, I can't speak for everyone in my family, but my healing is my responsibility. And so I realized that even raising a daughter, she has to lead by my example. I have to lead her with my example. So self-care has become super important, right? Just meditation and being able to travel and see the world and just pour into myself, right? Even when sometimes I feel like all of this is just on my shoulders, I have learned more and more to just lay my burdens down and live in the moment, because when it's my time to go, I have to be able to say, okay, you know what? I did everything that I said I wanted to do. I did everything that God put in my spirit in terms of a vision, a feeling, a thought, everything that God put inside of me. I know that I'm going to do the best that I can to bring it into fruition. And that's one of the things that keeps me going. So again, I cannot speak for everyone in my family, but as for myself, I am doing everything that I have to preserve myself, to preserve my peace of mind, learning how to forgive even those police officers. Like, a lot of my family and friends, they may not understand, but listen, in order for me to get further into my life and the meaning of what God put here for me to do on this earth, I have to forgive. I always say that forgiveness is like eraser to all the hatred and the pain that's stored within our hearts. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Move me. Thank you very much. Whew. So I just want to remind everybody listening that the Newark Civilian Complaint Review Board can take complaints directly from residents. So if you are ever in a situation like Ms. Williams, I hope you are not, and your family is not, but if you are uncomfortable reporting things to the police department directly, you can report them to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, and their webpage is www.newarkccrb.com. Okay, so there are other ways to report misconduct, to report violence that don't require you to speak directly to the police. I also want to make people know that any woman out there who needs trauma-related support, there is a Newark resource that is out there for you. It is the Shani Baraka Women's Wellness Center. It's at 300 Clinton Avenue in Newark. And Ms. Keisha Uri, who was supposed to be on the panel tonight, but is not feeling well, is the lead administrator there. And she apologizes for not being there, but she just wants everyone to know there is a resource out there for you. Again, that is the Shani Baraka Women's Wellness Center at 300 Clinton Avenue. And so I do want to get to some questions because we do have a few in the Q&A. And let me see, the first question that we have, and I will just throw this out there, and anyone who wants to pick it up, please do. How do we break the cycle and correlation of women of color who are incarcerated and also sexually abused? And I know I said anyone can take it, but actually, Dr. Swift, since you brought this up, maybe you can start it and then we can see where it goes.
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest piece is, my sister Taj talked about owning her healing, and that healing is critical. That's what breaks the cycle. Otherwise, we're constantly perpetuating this trauma. And so often we're seeing these cycles because people are not owning the fact that there's trauma. We endure a lot without ever putting the term trauma on it. And also without ever taking a moment to recognize that I have a burden on me. I mean, I listened to Dr. Harris speak earlier, and I'm just imagining the fear. I have 3 girls, which is fine, but I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've heard parents of boys talk about that ever-present fear, day in, day out. When they get in that car, I have this fear that's constantly, this adrenaline going. That's traumatizing. That is traumatizing. That weathers us. And we wonder why we have all these pre-existing conditions. Our bodies are being constantly assaulted. Our psyches are being assaulted with all of this trauma. And so the biggest piece, and I want to leave some space for other people to respond also, is we have to interrupt the cycle with healing. And that doesn't always have to look, I'm a clinician and I believe in what I do and I think it's helpful. And I wanted to add also to the, I didn't get a chance to talk about ABSI, the Association of Black Psychologists. Come to our website, njabsi.org. We have healing resources on there as well. And we also, we just started our new website. So in about 2 months, we'll have an updated version of our resource list of other clinicians that can help you with that healing. But the healing also has to come out of the clinical room as well. The healing has to happen within the broader family. And so I just wanted to say that piece.
Did anyone else want to follow up on that?
I want to add to the healing. It's also bringing it into visibility, and I think that's where education helps. I think that healing, we often think of it as something that happens in silo individually, but I think we need a community healing. And I think the only way we can really do it is we have to bring what has become invisible to us visible. Right, because these narratives and the way in which we even specifically talk about the intersectionality for African American women with their experiences with trauma, and especially in dealing with police and police interactions, or even their experiences when you talk about even with the legal system and the areas in which they do find that they have their most traumatic experiences are not the ones that we talk about in our history books and when we discuss, and we don't talk about them, you know, even amongst our community. So it's almost as if it's a record that is recorded and imprinted within us, but is never discussed. And so, you know, the interrelations that becomes necessary for us to be able to even collectively have those kind of exchanges means that we've got to be able to share these narratives, share these stories, and for people to understand, to be able to learn from them, to understand them, to see the similarities so that we can even begin to get to the space where we can really eradicate why these things repeatedly keep happening. But as long as we still operate with some sort of invisibility, that can't happen, because this is not a new history. This is not something that we are just becoming, privy to. You know, when you look at even the statistics for even, lynchings, the numbers of women are staggering. And yet, when people immediately think of the reality of lynching, they don't associate that with women. When you think about the number of arrests that happen, even into the civil rights movement, and and young people that were put in jails and the brutalities that were effectuated, our mental image, of course, always goes, to John Lewis. Yes, we might think about, some of our, our most famous, our freedom riders and the Diane Nashes, but those are individuals. We don't think of those as a collective. And so, we don't think about the Stockholm girls. Most people don't even know who they are, right? But those are, but the reality of how we have become invisible in that narrative has got to stop. And so we can't do a healing until we bring it to the forefront. I just wanted to make sure we added that.
I just want to, I want to acknowledge what Taj said about the tiredness, because I think that the work does, and I'm going to step back into my moderator position, but I'm really, wanting to kind of put together the worlds of, the system, law enforcement, and the burden, and how when all of those things combine, in addition to what Black women are expected to carry, there's a different valence there. And I'm curious if what people think about the specificity of all of these things on Black women, right? Because I think there's a different, there's an expectation of us that's different. And so I think we hold kind of the burden of it in a different way. And so, that's really what I was really hearing from Taj about what that felt like for her. And I think it's about that combination. I'm curious if you agree with me, or if you think it's not really that specific.
Well, I want to just touch on that a little bit. I swear it just came through. Something just said, listen, say it. And so one of the things that I was listening to everyone, just speak about so let me say this according to like one of the things that Monique said, right? She said, when you hurt a woman, you hurt a nation. And when you look at like the culture, right, of our music, right, and you hear how everything is just so lost in translation. That's what I say. It's lost in translation. It's like, we have to get back to understanding what it means to honor ourselves and to value ourselves and hold those standards and boundaries, because it's like if you leave it up to everybody, they'll just use you and abuse you, and we can't afford that. Our nation can't afford that. So one of the things that Felicia Rashad said, she said, where the culture goes, the women go. So I just caught that, and I've created a hashtag on Instagram. So every time I see something, whether it's from a man, a woman, anyone, and I just say the hashtag, the culture goes where the women go, because there has to be a change in how we do things in order to hold our value as a people. And we can't we can't deviate from that plan. So if that means that when I step in a room and people can't respect me for who I am and understand my standards and boundaries, you don't have to know my whole story. But if you can't understand my boundaries and my standards, then please remove yourself from around me. No, you know what I'm saying? It's no explanations, no nothing. We just need to be able to hold our value and move our culture and our nation in a different direction, because it's exhausting. Like, I mean, it's exhausting as a woman, as a mother, as a teacher, as a sister, as a daughter. We hold a lot of things, and most of it comes from the fact that no one wants to talk about things. And when you do open your mouth and start talking about things, many people want you to be quiet. They don't want to hear your truth. They don't want to deal with the truth. They don't want to deal with the things that's needed for us to uproot ourselves and get us going in the right direction. So I don't know if that answered your question, but again, it just
It did. It absolutely did. So we got a question actually directed for Crystal. Are there any particular initiatives that New Jersey is advancing to support Black women in the face of police violence that the public can support?
Well, I would encourage everyone to, number one, seek out your local NAACP, because through your local NAACP, you'll be able to advance things that are specific to what is happening in your local community. As from a state perspective, you can always come and join our state criminal justice committee. Right now, they've been working on things with the Attorney General's office, making sure there's accountability there. As you hear about different measures that are progressive or intended to be progressive, with respect to advancing initiatives around how women are treated under, the prisons, by police, all those things. And we've been, it took some, it's very new. Let me put this out there too, because it took some back and forth dialogue to get to the table. Our criminal justice chair, when learning about some of these things, reached out, and it wasn't a swift response to get to the table. And I know that there was a recent meeting that occurred, I want to say a week, no more than 2 weeks ago, where they're trying to formulate what that will look like. So it's really kind of a stay tuned thing. You can always go to the New Jersey State Conference NAACP website, as well as seek out your local branch for more information. But as far as specific initiatives, the chair could probably better articulate what is to come, but I do know that he has really started with, opening the door to making sure that they're in the room with some of these initiatives coming out of the Attorney General's office. And one thing I would say is, as you hear these things, it's always helpful, whether you're a member or not of our organization. To me, that's like, it's really immaterial whether you're a member. It's just a matter of you supporting the movement, right? You can do that as an individual. So when I say seek out your branch, by no means do I want anybody to think I'm out here soliciting memberships. I'm just soliciting a place for you to get information about your local community. And so, when you hear what we also have been trying to do, and I know what else he's been doing, is addressing, the Civil Service Commission and some of their very antiquated processes that are on the books that kind of prevent the diversity that you need to see when it comes to the hiring. I know that's something that they've been taking a big aim at, looking at who's taking the law enforcement exams. These are just, they may not be totally specific to the initiative question that she's asking, or he or she is asking, but these are the focal points for the criminal justice committee for NAACP. And when you look at diversity, you're absolutely addressing the women's issue as well. And I don't like to say it in that manner to make it seem like it's an afterthought, but we have to get in the door to tackle each and every item, and that's what they're trying to do.
I also just want to add that there's a bill that's kind of slowly winding its way through the legislature, 2656, which is a police transparency bill. Yes. And even though it's not necessarily being created to support Black women. What it is being created to do is to make police misconduct visible, and to make sure that people are accountable and that they're not just being shuffled around when they do something to cause harm in one community, that they're not just moved over to another community, and that even if they're no longer on the force, that they're not then, if they have a history that's questionable, being put into our schools or being put into prisons and jails to continue on with the bad behavior, right? So I think there are some legislative actions that are in play, that are in process to kind of end the bad behavior. But in doing so, I think that does kind of affect how Black women are moving in the world as well. So I just wanted to add that. I am curious, and I feel like this comes up at every time we have one of these panels, but it still remains true. We heard from Taj about her self-care, and I'm curious what everyone else on the panel does. I think anyone who's working with listening to people's trauma is obviously experiencing their own secondary trauma from that. I think we've been through a very traumatic 4 years. We've been through a very traumatic 6 months as a nation, as a community. I think the pandemic is really underscoring a lot of the kind of anxiety and stressors. And so in light of all of those things, I'm curious what people are doing to stay well, to stay healthy.
I can just say
if you want
that
to share.
yes. Well, let's go back before 6 months from now. I mean, seeing and hearing these stories I had to really learn to know when to not watch a video. I had to gauge what my day looked like, what my week looked like before I opened up something that was sent to me, or being able to sit down and hear a traumatic story, because there is secondary trauma. And I can tell you, there are some times where I say, I can't watch this today. And I have to say that I think that social media is a great tool for exposure for police misconduct and police assault and police murder, because we have the ability to film it ourselves. The flip side of it is it gives us all the exposure to the world to constantly watch it. And when you're constantly watching people who look like you, makes you think of your uncle, your brother, your father, your sister, your daughter, and you're watching them be gunned down and you're seeing all these horrific things, it really takes a toll. And I know for me, prior to the pandemic, you had the option of going to the gym or, doing something that's totally outside of that world or that realm, and just allowing yourself to be, free of that feeling. It's a heaviness that you really carry, being in this work, because you're in the work because you're looking for better outcomes. There's nothing else you're trying to gain. You don't gain a paycheck. You don't get any other kind of fortune. You just want your people to live. You want your people to do better. And when you're seeing it over and over again, I had to learn to take time to really focus on self-care. Like Taj hit it on the head. You have to know when to press that button, because otherwise life will press it for you in some other way, shape, or fashion. And it could be pressed when next thing you know, you have high blood pressure. Next thing you know, you're dealing with anxiety and other kinds of disorders that require a different type of attention. I think I just encourage people to always to get ahead of it before it gets ahead of you. And know that, while it's very important, exposing what's happening is extremely important. You have to just also be mindful of what it exposes you to as well, and because it affects your resilience. So that's one of the things I had to learn to do. I had to learn to say, you know what, today is not going to be today. I had a long day on my day job and it wasn't great, and I don't know if I could take the trauma of watching this tonight. I don't know if I can tackle it, because if you don't stop and pause, you really won't be able to fight for anyone or yourself going forward if you let it knock you out. So that's one of the things I always encourage. Self-care. You just have to know when to press pause on for yourself.
I will share that I had to give up the savior complex, and I learned how to say no as a full sentence, as a complete sentence, and that I every battle I could not fight if I didn't have the energy to fight them. And so I guess like Ms. Sibley, I had to get to the place where I knew when I had to create my own filter as to what I could take in and what I couldn't, so that I could live on to fight another day, because it will drain you. I think all of us felt to our soul your statement about being tired, Taj, because we know that soul tired. You know, when I hear your statement, Monique, about, you know, when you hurt a woman, you hurt a nation or a community, it's because we're the nurturers. We nurture that. And so we don't want that to be manifested in the way in which we are living and breathing and nurturing our community, our children, our families, ourselves. And so you do have to get to the space where you can learn how to filter what you take in. I guess for me as a historian, my balance has always been that when I know that I'm intaking too much negative, I try to go and find something positive. And so I found that I have sought out biographies or stories of history of the beauty of who Black people are, when I found that the world is confronting us with the images and the brutalities that have come against them. And so I think it's made me probably a much more diverse historian, but it was my own personal way to kind of feed my soul with a balance, and to allow myself to feel like I was really filling myself with something that could become the counter narrative, and something that would birth for me a space where I could be able to dispel it and to teach it, that would be able to come out of me, that could nurture my own soul, but also nurture others, and to really be able to counteract all the atrocities that the world seems to want to place on us, most especially as African American women. So that's been my method of self-care for the last couple of years.
Yeah. And I think these are great methods and techniques for enduring and dealing. For me, I'm a strong proponent of mindfulness and meditation strategies. They get right to the core of the trauma that we experience, that we carry in our bodies, and they help to quiet the racing heart, quiet the mind. And so I use these, I teach them a lot in my sessions, but I also use them to my own advantage as well. In addition to some of the other things people have said, I also, I think there's something that needs to be said for being able to lean on the realization of your own resilience. When I look back sometimes at some of the things that I've endured, that I've gone through, I'm able to pull strength from that to be able to say, if I got through that, I could get through this. And I'm saying that too, to say to us collectively that we as a people are a extraordinarily resilient people. And I don't say that in the spirit of, oh, we can handle it. No, 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 not at all. But we have endured. And because of what we've endured, we have built up a strength, a spirit, a resilience, a soul power that no other people on the face of this earth have. And so we have to also own that and walk with that and tap into that collective resilience that we've built when we're experiencing moments such as what we are in right now.
Fabulous. Thank you. We're getting close to the end. It's 7:23. And I wanted to give everybody a moment to be able to have a final thought about trauma, about the infliction of it, about holding it, about releasing it, but how our Blackness is a lens, our Blackness is an experience, um, filters how we move through it. I keep saying move through, but I feel like it's the only it's a good way to describe what we're trying to get at here, because it's never ending, right? It's this kind of constant wall that we're up against. So how do we continue to move forward in light of that? And so if everyone can just give us a little closing word, a closing sentence to send us on our way.
If I may, I guess more of a continuation of what I was just talking about. But in terms of getting through, when I was listening to our sister Taj talk about her being tired, and I think everybody here could feel that. There are probably many women watching that can feel that understood that. And so we as a people, I think it was Dr. Harris that was talking about how we function in silos. We tend to function in silos, but our healing again is in the collective, and we have to lean on one another. So to what you're saying, I just want to kind of leave us with an encouragement that we have to begin to circle up together. We have to lean on one another. Many of us are in the same pain, but we are in the same pain by ourselves, and we don't look and lean on one another for the outlets for that. And so that's the encouragement that I kind of wanted to leave us with. And in terms of circling up, the Association of Black Psychologists have two healing circles that we do. We just started during coronavirus time. We call it Salbona Healing Circle. And the Salbona Healing Circles, anybody can come in. You can, come in and out as freely as you want, but it's a way for us to kind of get together and lean on each other and embrace each other. We also do, which are more extensive, the emotionally emancipation circles, which basically helps us to begin our healing from racial trauma. And so these are some things, and I'm sure there are more that are out there, but these are some things that I want us to think about, to have as we move forward, to know that there is healing out there. Thank you.
Ms. Sibley? Oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead, Ms. Williams.
Oh, thank you. So one, I just want to say thank you to Baba Zaid for, just extending this opportunity for me to be able to speak with you all. It's been an amazing evening just to be able to share this platform and speak to each of you, because you all just bring such a different perspective to a bunch of different things, that we need. So when you talk about leaning on one another and creating a circle, I am all about that. I am here. I wanted to share also, just in my closing thoughts, right? Like, I am someone who was born and raised here in Newark. And I find that, like, even, I've worked in the corporate arena, or like, in different businesses and stuff like that for so long. And I just recently went back to teach at my high school, which is Newark Tech. When I look at my children, and I say my children because they're mine, right? So, but when I look at the students virtually and I'm listening to them, and I'm seeing how disengaged they are, and I've just been trying to do whatever I could to try to bring light to them, and I find that the more that I do the digging, right? And so when I reference this term digging a lot with my daughter, because she's 14 right now. So she's getting to that stage now where she don't want to deal with anything, and she just wants to sweep it under the rug and just keep on about her life. And I'm like, baby girl, I've been breaking down some structures and renovating and just demoing for the last couple of years. And so now I'm teaching her that, what I did was I was burying so many things. Every time something happened, I buried it. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to deal with it. But what happened is, at some point you're going to have to deal with it. So my goal right now is to just work with her and teach her, as you go, stand for something, have some standards, however you feel, express your feelings, don't bury them, right? And then work through it. So as you know, I'm teaching my daughter, right? I'm rebuilding myself back up because I literally had to go and break down everything. And so I find myself doing this all in this like divine timing and divine order kind of way where I am the example for my daughter. I'm now doing something that I've always dreamt of doing, which is working at my high school, right? Teaching high school students. So there's a responsibility, you know, a huge responsibility of me to take care of myself so that I can be a person that can stand in front of them and show them their best reflection. And so sometimes I might fall short because sometimes I do get tired and I cry and I do find myself being such in this space of like just being not lonely but alone. And I've grown to be somewhat okay with that because I used to be afraid of being alone. But now I'm like, I got this. But sometimes I do need help and sometimes I do need sisters in the journey who understand and who can help me and not try to do any more harm and breaking me down. Okay, I'm done. I'm over that. So, but thank you all for just this opportunity, and I just feel like it's blessed me in a way that I can't say that I've ever been blessed before, even with sharing my brother's story. Like I there's a renewing going on, and I can say that the pandemic definitely didn't do it did a lot of harm. It came and it did some damage, but it definitely is opening up some new ground. So I'm ready for it.
It is 7:30 on the nose, and I am so sorry because I don't mean to cut everybody off, but we have a limited time. So I once again want to thank all of you for your phenomenal contributions to the world that we live in and to this panel today. These conversations are always very powerful, and I think about them for days after they happen. So I deeply appreciate everybody tonight. And thank you for everybody who tuned in on Facebook and on the Zoom, and for NCAP for hosting it. Very much looking for part 4. I hope it's coming up soon. Again, thank you. And I wish everybody the best for the season. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks for having us.